Beloveds, welcome to Nurture the Soul. I am your host today, Reverend Ellie Hutchison, and I am the Minister for Congregational and Community Engagement with the Faith Info team, and we are a part of the Love of Church at the National Ministry setting of the United Church of Christ. I use they, them pronouns, and today am wearing a black tank top with gold-rimmed glasses, black round gold earrings, and I have a short blonde pixie cut. Nurture the Soul is a weekly webinar that provides our local churches and faith practitioners with multitudes of practical, educational, innovative, and formational resources in which to engage with the critical topics of our time and to center the care and education for the people of God. From cultural and community organizing to congregational leadership, from worship and theology to resourcing small and rural churches, and with the ministry of our youth and children to a wide array of justice issues, we feature guest artists, authors, theologians, biblical scholars, key leaders in our communities. Nurture the Soul seeks to stay relevant with how the gospel is alive for us at this time. And we hope that this virtual space is indeed a space of connection, of community, and nurture because we believe in the collective movement towards the world that God imagines for all of us. We invite you every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Nurture the Soul. And from time to time, as you will see this election series, for our special offerings. And you can find a full list of upcoming digital programs at www.ucc.org/events or on all of our social media platforms. Friends and beloveds, if these conversations move you, if what is offered today helps to enhance the ministry or your soul or invokes a bunch of curiosity for you, we invite you to consider donating to the United Church of Christ by texting the letters UCC to the numbers 41444. It is your prayerful and financial support that helps these conversations to keep going. I want to thank you for supporting us and thank you for being with us today. But before I introduce you to our marvelous presenters, I'd like to remind you, and I see some of you are already using it, which I love. That means you've been here before. We invite you to use the chat feature to share where you're zooming in from and to continue the conversation in and amongst during the time that we are here virtually together. And you can find the chat feature along the bottom of your screen with an icon that looks like an old dialogue bubble from the cartoons, or I should say a dialogue bubble from the old cartoons, with 3 dots in the center of it. And we also invite you to use the Q&A feature. We're going to have a robust Q&A conversation post-presentation today. And we hope that you use this Q&A feature for us to easily find the questions that you are asking. And you can find that again with another dialogue bubble with the letters Q&A below it and a question mark in the middle. Again, we'll take time at the end of our session in order to answer as many questions as we can. And if we don't get a chance to answer them, you can feel free to email me and I will be sure to connect you to the right people. Beloveds, I cannot tell you how excited I am to not be facilitating the conversation today, because I'm going to be a consumer. I get to sit back and learn and enhance all of the questions that I've had come up over the last several months, even up to the last year. And I am blessed to be joined by our global ministry partners. Dr. Peter Macari and Becca Choate are going to be facilitating today's conversation. And we are joined by the Reverend Dr. Donald Wagner, who is a retired Presbyterian pastor and theologian, and then Reverend William T. Young, who is a pastor of Covenant Baptist United Church of Christ. They're going to help us unpack and challenge the Christian Zionism in our context. And so with that, I invite our presenters to go ahead and our panelists to turn your cameras on. And Peter, welcome. Thank you for facilitating the conversation today. It's such a a wonderful space to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie, for all of your work and for hosting the webinar today. And hello to everyone who has joined us. Let me add my own welcome to you in this special Nurture the Soul webinar during our Keep Hope Alive campaign week. Today's webinar focuses on Christian Zionism in our churches and is part of this week's Keep Hope Alive campaign, a collaborative effort of the United Church of Christ's Office of Public Policy and Advocacy in Washington, D.C., and global ministries of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and United Church of Christ. My name is Peter McCary, and I serve in global ministries as Global Relations Minister for the Middle East and Europe. A special thanks to the campaign's planning team made up of the Reverend Michael Neuroth, Director of the UCC's Washington office, Helen Smith, the International Policy Advocate, and Hannah Santos, Communications and Campaign Specialist, all in the UCC's DC office, and Rebecca Choate, Minister for Global Advocacy and Education, and Marcy Gansler, Mission Education and Communications Program Manager in Global Ministries, based here in Cleveland. And again, thanks to Reverend Ellie Hutchison, Minister for Congregational and Community Engagement for the UCC, and Brooke Canada and Andrea Burse for behind-the-scenes support. We all join in welcoming and thanking you for your participation today and throughout the week to walk with our partners through sustained accompaniment with programs like the Joint Advocacy Initiative of the YM and YWCA in Palestine, Keep Hope Alive, supporting partners' responses to the ongoing war and genocide in the Middle East, and advocacy with our elected officials to end the war and promote a long-term, just, and durable peace. In 1986, the Middle East Council of Churches addressed the issue of Christian Zionism, condemning the, quote, misuse of the Bible and the abuse of religious sentiments in an attempt to sacralize the creation of a state and legitimize the policies of a government, end quote. 20 years later, the Latin Catholic and Syriac Orthodox patriarchs, with the Anglican and Lutheran bishops in Jerusalem, issued a statement called the Jerusalem Declaration on Christian Zionism. In it, they stated, quote, Christian Zionism is detrimental to a just peace in Palestine and Israel. The Christian Zionist program provides a worldview where the gospel is identified with the ideology of empire, colonialism, and militarism. We categorically reject Christian Zionist doctrines as false teaching that corrupts the biblical message of love, justice, and reconciliation. We reject the teachings of Christian Zionism that facilitate and support these policies as they advance racial exclusivity and perpetual war rather than the gospel of universal love, redemption, and reconciliation taught by Jesus Christ. With urgency, we warn that Christian Zionism and its alliances are justifying colonization, apartheid, and empire building. God demands that justice be done. We stand for justice. We can do no other. By standing on the side of justice, we open ourselves to the work of peace, and working for peace makes us children of God, end quote. But today, peace seems like a distant dream. We are in a time of war and genocide, so the work of peace is needed now as ever. As Israel's war on Gaza has continued for over 1 year and has intensified in the Palestinian West Bank, as well as in Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and Yemen, more than 42,000 Palestinians have been killed, 100,000 have been injured, and thousands are unaccounted for. Most of the 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza are suffering starvation, desperate for medical care, and are displaced from their homes and communities, which have been targeted and destroyed. Our Middle Eastern church partners remind us, though, that history did not begin on October 7th, 2023. It is a history that goes much deeper, spanning at least a century. As we will see today, the roots of Christian Zionism, often most closely associated with a strand of evangelicalism called premillennial dispensationalism, are even longer. In his 2023 book, Decolonizing Palestine, the Reverend Dr. Mitri Rahib suggests that Christian Zionism is even more expansive, including any Christians who uncritically support Israel, guided by their faith. More dangerous are liberal Christian Zionists who are progressive on everything but Palestine. Rahab also draws a direct connection between Christian Zionism, Christian nationalism, and white privilege in the US context, a privilege people may not even be conscious of, but that they enjoy. Reverend Rahab challenges the predominantly white mainline and progressive churches in the West, especially in the US, to work to conscientize ourselves about that. The United Church of Christ and Christian Church Disciples of Christ have a long history of partnership and engagement in the Middle East, including among Palestinian Christian churches and organizations. These perspectives have informed our understanding of issues related to the region, including positions adopted by General Synod and General Assembly on Christian Zionism. For the UCC, the General Synod in 2003 rejected the theological claims of Christian Zionism, which seek to privilege Jews in the modern state of Israel over others who share the land. And instead, while recognizing the diversity of biblical perspectives on the question of a Jewish homeland, also affirmed that all such perspectives should be grounded in the message of justice and peace taught by Jesus and the biblical prophets. In respective resolutions, the UCC at General Synod in 2021 and the Disciples at General Assembly in 2023 rejected any theology or ideology, including Christian Zionism, supersessionism, anti-Semitism, or anti-Islam bias that would privilege or exclude any one nation, race, culture, or religion. Today, we are privileged to have the chance to explore Christian Zionism in a bit more depth and learn from two colleagues who will talk about Christian Zionism from their own unique experiences and perspectives as American Christians. The Reverend Dr. Don Wagner received a Master's of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary and a Doctor of Ministry degree from McCormick Theological Seminary. He was director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Chicago's North Park University and has served as National Director of the Palestine Human Rights Campaign, was Director of Middle East Programs for Mercy Corps International, and was co-founder of Evangelicals for Middle East Understanding. He is an ordained Presbyterian clergyperson who has been working on advocacy for Palestinian justice and peace for 45 years. He is the author of 6 books, the latest of which is his memoir, Glory to God in the Lowest, Journeys to an Unholy Land. Don was brought up in a Christian Zionist background, a self-described post-Holocaust supporter of Zionism. He later served a church in Evanston, Illinois, where he was exposed to Palestinians and learned their story. He visited the Middle East in the 1970s for the first time, promoting him to think more deeply about liberation theology in his encounters. He was in Beirut in September 1982 at the time of Israel's invasion and the massacres at the Sabra and Shatila Palestinian refugee camps. I would encourage you to read his memoir to experience his faith journey. The Reverend William Young IV grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he graduated from the School for Creative and Performing Arts in 1996. William received his Bachelor of Arts degree from the American Baptist College in Nashville, Tennessee, and continued his education at Vanderbilt University Divinity School, graduating with a Master of Divinity. Upon moving to the United Kingdom in 2004, he studied at Birmingham University in England, receiving a Master's in Global Political Economy, a Master of Theology from Edinburgh University in Scotland, and the Master of Philosophy from Glasgow University in Scotland. He was an assistant minister at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh and served under the chaplain to the Queen. William organized the first Martin Luther King Day service and the first Jazz Vespers service in the cathedral. In 2013, he was ordained as a minister of Word and Sacraments in the United Reformed Church in the United Kingdom, one of our partners, where he served for 8 years. In July of 2018, he gave the closing address at the mass demonstration against President Trump's visit to the UK at historic George Square in Glasgow city centre and organized the City of Glasgow's Racial Justice Sunday service in February of 2020. Ecumenically, Reverend Young has been active with the World Council of Churches and the Council for World Mission. In 2014, he joined the Scottish Church's Anti-Human Trafficking Group, which he eventually chaired. He was also a member of the Strategic Oversight Committee on Human Trafficking Policy in the Scottish Parliament. As an activist, he regularly spoke to churches and social justice organizations throughout Scotland on the legacies of slavery and racism, and was a member of the Church and Society Committee of the United Reformed Church National Synod of Scotland. In November 2019, Reverend Young became the 8th pastor of Covenant Baptist United Church of Christ in Washington, D.C., and began his ministry with them in April of 2020. He and I are both members of the Board of Churches for Middle East Peace, and William is also on the board of Bright Stars of Bethlehem, the Western support body of Dar el-Kalima University in Bethlehem, another of our partners. Don and William, welcome. We are grateful for your presence with us today. And just a reminder to the audience to please use the Q&A box as you think of your questions. Don, would you begin with some historical background on Christian Zionism, where it comes from, what its influences are, and its scriptural basis, especially as understood in evangelical communities?
Thank you very much. Appreciate the introduction, and just a joy to be with all of you today. Thank you, Peter, and the team. And I just have such great respect for what you are doing with Global Ministries and UCC. Our hearts are heavy today. I have to confess my anger, my frustration, and working so hard on justice and getting nowhere with the deafness of this administration and our government. But that's our challenge. And Christian Zionism is a pivotal part of that. I must also recognize I'm going to be talking about settler colonialism, and I am a settler in Chicago, sitting on the lands of the Potawatomi, the Ojibwe, Menominee, Odawan, and Ho-Chunk tribes and nations. Well, let me say I'll try to do my best to stay on time. I have a lot to share, and I'll talk about the history a bit. Then I'll move to, I'll touch on settler colonial analysis and end with a few biblical themes. So let me begin with the definition of Christian Zionism. I'll be dealing with this as an evangelical, Reformed evangelical, and I want to reclaim that term, but an evangelical who believes in justice and liberation theology. So the definition I'd share with you on Christian Zionism, it is a political ideology that supports the political goals of the Zionist movement, which are based on racial supremacy and settler colonialism. Like political Jewish Zionism, Christian Zionism affirms the state of Israel as a Jewish state with the biblical right to colonize the entirety of historic Palestine and maintain an apartheid system of domination over Palestinians. Christian Zionism provides a false theology and a pseudo-biblical analysis and promotion of Zionism. So you can see in that I am going to focus first on a political analysis. For about 20 years, when I was studying and reflecting and writing on this, I thought reforming Christian Zionism with biblical analysis was the place to start. It's still important, but Zionism and Christian Zionism are essentially political ideology. The Palestine issue will not be solved without a political solution. So therefore, we must look at that politically. So in my analysis, I used to go back to the Reformation and how the Bible became prominent in its interpretation. But I began to realize later that it really is a political analysis we need. So I start with how Christian Zionism became a political force. So I go back to the 19th century, and I start with a figure named Lord Shaftesbury. He was a very prominent evangelical, and there are two types of evangelical Christian Zionism. He was what they call a restorationist. He believed that if the Jewish people were restored to Palestine, it would bring on the second coming of Jesus in his millennial rule. So Shaftesbury lobbied Parliament considerably to support the return of the Jews to Palestine as a Christian doctrine. He is also credited, and this is debatable, with the phrase, a people of no country for a country with no people. And you can see right away that became the theme of the Zionist movement, a land of no people for people with no land. So he supported a political approach in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. The second person I'd point to would be Reverend William Heckler. Reverend Heckler in the 1880s and 1890s was the chaplain of the British forces in Austria. He befriended Theodor Herzl before he started the Zionist movement, and he viewed him as a prophet come to restore the Jews to Palestine. Heckler was a premillennialist. He believed in the rapture, the Battle of Armageddon, and how Israel would be restored at the end of time. But his political work was strategic as he introduced Herzl to the Caliph of the Ottoman Empire, where he asked for a land in Palestine, and also to the German Kaiser, where he did the same. So Heckler played a political role in advancing Zionism. The third person I'd point to is a Chicagoan, William E. Blackstone. I was going to say Reverend, he was not. He was a dispensationalist. He wrote a book called Jesus is Coming, which was kind of the late great Planet Earth of his day, the Left Behind series, all in one. But he organized the first Zionist lobby in the United States in 1891 and 92. It was a national campaign from Boston to the Mississippi, where clergy, senators, congresspeople were signing a petition asking the president, who then was President Harrison, to create a Jewish state in Palestine because of the suffering of the Jews under the pogroms in Eastern Europe. The president rejected that, but that paved the way for a lot of political models from Christians to support Zionism. I would also mention, just briefly in passing, because time is fleeting me, that Lord Arthur Balfour, was a Christian Zionist. He was predisposed to Zionism because of his upbringing in a dispensationalist theology. However, his approach was really an imperial colonialist one, where he wanted the British Empire to control the Eastern Mediterranean and build a bridge across to its jewel in the crown, India. So there are four models taking a Christian political approach as evangelicals. Let me turn now to settler colonial ideology. If I had to go back and do graduate school again, I would be a student of settler colonialism. That would be my major. It's a relatively recent discipline, and the father of it is really began to develop it in the 1980s, Dr. Patrick Wolf. He defines settler colonialism as follows: essentially hegemonic in scope, settler colonialism normalizes the continuous settler occupation, exploiting lands and resources to which indigenous people have genealogical relationships. Settler colonizers do not merely exploit indigenous peoples for their land and labor and economic interests, they displace them through settlements. This is an apt analysis of what the Zionist movement is and how Christian Zionism supports it. Traditional colonialism may occupy for some time, exploit, dominate, even kill many of the people, but eventually they're driven out or leave. Settler colonizers and settler colonialist regimes displace and stay and replace. And this is what Zionism is doing and Christian Zionism is supporting. They use the term in analyzing settler colonialism, terra nullius, or empty land in Latin, land without people. So you see right away, a land of no people for a people without land emphasizes that theme. Another scholar of it was Lorenzo Veracini, also in Australia, where he writes, Zionism is a settler colonial movement, and Israel is a settler colonial state. This is not an insult. It is a statement of fact. The Zionists were foreign to Palestine. They aimed to conquer the land and establish their sovereignty. They formalized this conquest in the establishment of the State of Israel. Historically now, we see Israel and Palestine under a governing arrangement characterized by a logic of elimination, by a practice of replacement of the indigenous Palestinian. So there you see definitions and the analysis. So this is why I use the frame settler colonialism, both to analyze, but also it guides my theology. And I move to really liberation theology and settler colonialism in my analysis. Let me briefly mention, and my time is fleeting, I know, just 4 or 5 biblical themes that we need to address. And I think in our churches, you in the UCC maybe are not cursed as much with Christian Zionism as I have been, even as a Presbyterian, but still you have lingering elements of it. So the first biblical theme I would raise is, who is God? Is our understanding of God the inclusive creator of all? So in the first chapter of Genesis, we see God created us in the image of God, imago Dei, giving us the responsibility to protect the dignity and honor of every human being is equal. The Hebrew in chapter 1 is Elohim, and this is a later development of the scriptures. And it is, again, a more inclusive, racially inclusive, gender inclusive understanding of who God is, the creator, and who we are. However, in chapter 2a, following that second creation story, uses Yahweh, a very different idea of God. Yahweh, who is much more exclusive, creates a chosen people, an exclusive people, even honors them and grants them the land indefinitely. And this is also the name for God used in the book of Joshua and other places where genocide is also embraced. So one version of God can critique the other as a later development. So who is God is absolutely inclusive, and we need to utilize this, and here liberation theology is a great asset. The second biblical theme I would raise is the first commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Zionism and Christian Zionism inevitably lead to idolatry, an idolatry of the state, of militarism, of systems of apartheid, and defend them as even godlike. Christian Zionism does not exclude God, but marginalizes God. Rather than being Lord of all, creation of all, who we submit to, God is in a sense marginalized in service of a state and an ideology that is essentially racist and settler colonial. I pick up the idea of imago Dei for a third biblical point. B'Tselem is the leading Israeli human rights organization in the image of God. We honor human rights. Everyone is equal. International law becomes a basis. Today, international law is at risk because of what Zionism is doing to undermine it. And we in the US are paying for it. So our mission, in a sense, is to rescue international law and honor and lift it up. Fourth, I'd raise the issue of those who have eyes to see, let them see. Jesus is constantly challenging the disciples, the scribes, but also the Pharisees and the established religion of not seeing. We need a theology of seeing and critique our unseeing. We need to center Palestinian voices and narratives. There's my timer warning me. Palestinian voices are marginalized in our media, particularly in the US. We never see them, even on MSNBC. We have a responsibility to honor, lift, and elevate Palestinian voices and narratives to critique and honor us. And in the church, we must certainly do this. And finally, who is Israel? There are 4 definitions of Israel in the Bible, 4 definitions from one of the patriarchs who becomes Israel, the young state, the monarchy, and then the state with the northern kingdom, which was eventually carried away. But there is no definition that points to a modern, future, politically organized Zionist state. In our congregations, we really need to help people with this in our hymns, in our theology, our liturgies. We need to help educate that the modern state is not the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, nor is it equal to the biblical ideas of Israel. So we have a massive responsibility there. So finally, I would conclude, liberation theology, settler colonial ideology are our tools to help us move toward justice, to move the church, but also be advocating with our senators, the president, or congressmen in this age of genocide. We are watching a televised genocide. And this is what we must do. It is like Germany in the 1932-33. And we must elevate our advocacy on behalf of all the Palestinians, but also to liberate Israel, which is about to go over the cliff. It's time to take the keys away, cut U.S. aid to Israel. And this is for me, it's an act of Christian stewardship that my taxes should not be used to oppress another people. So I'll have to stop there. Thank you very much. And I look forward to our brother who's coming up next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don, for that framework and analysis and challenge as well. I'm grateful for your work. William, would you speak about the influence of Christian Zionism in progressive liberal mainline churches, conscious and unconscious, including in the historically Black churches?
First of all, thank you to our revered Dr. McMackery and for this opportunity. If I can do nothing but just say yay and amen to everything Dr. Wagner has offered us this afternoon. It's such a privilege to be in this webinar with both of you and with this great cloud of witnesses today. Yes, I'll talk about a bit about the history of progressive progressive evangelicalism and its influence on this ongoing catastrophe. But first of all, in keeping with the protocol that Don has established of establishing, recognizing our settler colonial reality in this country, I'll say greetings from Washington, D.C., the land of the Natanchak Anacostan peoples, among many. But progressive evangelicalism, it stems one of the great denial of progressive Christians, liberal Christians, is that we are nothing like evangelicals. But the truth is that we stem from the evangelical tradition, 19th century evangelical tradition that Dr. Wagner has just described. And so we are as much part of the Zionist thought as those who hold dispensationalist leanings. Liberal Christianity, of course, stems from the Enlightenment era, 17th and 18th centuries, and then has a deeper root in the 19th century social gospel movement. Those in the room who've had a theological education, you should know the name Walter Rauschenbusch, pastor, a 19th century pastor in Hell's Kitchen neighborhood of New York City, immigrant neighborhood, And by 1907, as professor of Rochester Theological Seminary in New York, he writes the book Christianity and the Social Crisis, a book that becomes very influential for those who would shape progressive politics in this country in the first half of the 20th century. But before it was a theology, a theological system, it was a church movement. Post-Civil War, 19th century, the abolitionists really before the Civil War become the social reformers after the Civil War, as urbanization and industrialization brings a great many social issues to light, poverty, child labor, women's suffrage, substance abuse, through the temperance movement, the crowding of cities due to migration and immigration, all of those issues and so many more, or fixated progressive Christians in the 19th century, including African American churches. The idea of holistic ministry stems from the work of Black pastors in Chicago and New York City, and of course Washington D.C. as well, among other areas. It was the progressive Christians that raised money through missionary associations in the 19th century that helped African Americans to former slaves to build communities, to build churches, and more particularly, many HBCUs were founded by progressive evangelical associations. Howard University here in DC, Morehouse, Spelman, Fisk, all products of former abolitionists becoming social reformers. And so in the 19th century, as Black people and Jews were among the most despised groups in America in the 19th century, the focus of these progressive groups was to minister to them. Although this took the form of what I like to think of as a generous white supremacy. Generous white supremacy, or good old-fashioned liberal white guilt. The late historian Egil Feldman describes the 19th century practice of progressive groups to evangelize to the Jews. He calls this, I like the term, Protestant condescension. So their understanding of African Americans and Jews, while noble, their actions were noble, but their ideas were based on a theology and philosophy of white supremacy that still saw the people that they were helping as uncivilized, and themselves as the civilizers of the lost. So although the social gospel became the seed of many social transformations, it retained a triumphalist, if not intentionally Zionist perspective that saw Jews, along with African Americans, as lost and needing salvation, and in some cases needing to be removed from civilized Christian society. And thus Zionism and the idea to send European Jews, mind you, back to their homeland, that becomes an idea that becomes spread throughout even progressive Christian communities. But the mid-20th century political landscape in America is centered around individuals who were influenced by the social gospel movement. like the Roosevelts. Eleanor Roosevelt, who of course becomes the inspiration behind the United Nations. She was influenced by the social gospel movement. FDR's labor secretary, Frances Perkins, who was the first woman to serve in a cabinet position in the U.S. government, and the real genius behind the New Deal, the implementation of the New Deal. Frances Perkins was an Episcopalian like the Roosevelts, very inspired by social movements. And then when it comes to FDR and his legislation, Mitri Raheb talks about this. He unveils this, brings this out in his book, Decolonizing Palestine. In 1944, he signs the GI Bill, the Great GI Bill, which, among other things, gives Jews the status of being part of the white race. For the first time in history, they are classified as white, along with European, Eastern Europeans and other Irish people as well, Irish Americans. They are categorized as white for the first time in history. And so the GI Bill marks a cultural shift in the perceptions of Jewish people in America. But it also comes with a further acceptance of a narrative that had already been established, because what they did by categorizing Jews as white for the first time in history, they also relegate a religious group to a racial group. So it's the same process. Ralph Bunche is another important figure in this story to talk about. The African-American story in this. Ralph Bunche is the first African-American to win the Nobel Peace Prize for his mediation of the first Arab-Israeli War, which followed the Nakba in 1948. Ralph Bunche was born, raised Baptist. He was baptized in the Second Baptist Church in Detroit. And then when his parents died, his extended family were members of the Second Baptist Church in Los Angeles, where he later went to UCLA. And so two historic churches in Ralph Bunche's life with strong connections to the social gospel tradition. They were doing holistic ministry before that even became a term. And it is also through those churches that I believe that he became interested to the proximity those churches had with Pan-African thought, Marcus Garvey and others, where Bunche became acquainted with the issues of colonization around the world, and that would become his research focus for him at UCLA and Harvard and at Howard as a professor. And then he would go to practice what he preached as one of the most valuable mediators in the early decades of the United Nations. But Israel was one of his first assignments. His predecessor in the Arab-Israeli War mediation, the Swedish Prince Folke Bernadotte, had been assassinated by Israeli militants as soon as he arrived in Israel. And so the Bunche had the ominous task of taking the lead of that mediation. And interestingly, many African Americans took issue with Ralph Bunche and the sympathy, particularly that he shared with the Palestinians. One of his teaching buddies at Howard University was W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a devout Zionist. And W.E.B. Du Bois criticized him for being too sympathetic to Arab request and Arab needs. And they had a falling out during this time, never spoke to each other again. But that has some synergies with the way African Americans were feeling towards Jews. Some African American Christians did see Zionism as a liberation movement akin to their own desires for liberation. And so Du Bois was a part of that faction. Well, after World War II, the reality of the Holocaust, again, as Mitri Raheb describes so very articulately in that book, it leads to post-Holocaust theological viewpoints, both on liberal Christian side and on the Jewish end. And most famous among the liberal Christian theologians who showed sympathy for the state of Israel was Karl Barth. We all have loved Karl Barth at some point in time in our lives. But by the 1960s, the tensions in the Middle East were being played out even in the civil rights movement. Malcolm X, he visited the Middle East, and that was the beginning, symbolic beginning of the solidarity movement in this country for Palestinians. However, Martin Luther King, who he had visited the Middle East in 1959, but he did not have a deep encounter with the politics of the Middle East until the occasion of 1967 and the Six-Day War. You remember 1967, April of that year, he gives his Beyond Vietnam address at Riverside Church in New York City. By June of that year, the Six-Day War is arising, and on the eve of the war, Dr. King is invited to be a signatory on a statement to be published by the New York Times entitled "The Moral Responsibility in the Middle East." It was composed by the president of Union Theological Seminary at the time, John Bennett, and among the noted scholars and theologians on that list of signatories was Reinhold Niebuhr. Again, how many of us have loved Reinhold Niebuhr in our day and time? But the purpose of that letter, of that statement, was to encourage the U.S. government to side with Israel in the war as it was burgeoning, so that Israel could possess the Strait of Tiran. And when the New York Times published the article, among all the signatories that were on that letter, the headline reads, "Dr. King among the signers." He was the only African American on the list. It hadn't signed it, hadn't composed it, rather. And apparently there is FBI surveillance. We all know that the FBI spied on Dr. King, but there is recordings that confirm in conversations with his advisors after the statement came out that Dr. King was disappointed that he had signed the statement. And when the advisors asked him why did they do it, he said that he had not really read the statement, which is unfortunate because he was being criticized fiercely after that statement. Not Reinhold Niebuhr, not John Bennett, but Dr. King. So that's deeply unfortunate that he had not really read the statement, and I'm thinking with my sanctified imagination, perhaps he had seen friends like Reinhold Niebuhr on it. It was written by the president of Union Seminary, that great bastion of liberal Christianity. So he must have felt that it was legit, but it blew up in his face, and I think that he realized he had been duped yet again by liberal Christians. Remember, he railed about them in a letter to the Birmingham jail. But at the end of the war, the same group of theologians put out another letter of support. And that time, King had refused to sign the letter. And later on, he has to answer for himself. And he's on ABC News. Some of you old enough to know, remember Tom Jarrell. He's interviewing Dr. King, and he asks about the war, and particularly if Israel should give back the land that they had just taken. The first thing Dr. King says is very pragmatic, is that the United Nations should handle it. Probably thinking of Ralph Bunche, who was still the prime mediator on Middle Eastern and African affairs and the UN. But finally, he says, and I quote, "I think it for the ultimate peace and security of the situation, it'll probably be necessary for Israel to give up this conquered territory, because to hold on to it will only exacerbate the tensions and deepen the bitterness of the Arabs," which comes to mean that he supported Israeli actions during the war, but he did not favor Israel's continued hold on the territories that it had conquered.
William, I'm going to have to interrupt just because we want to have a little bit of time for the questions and answers. I'm sorry, that's so rich and deep, and there's so much more we could learn from you. I hate to have to do that, but I appreciate your understanding. And just want to thank again both you and Don for your presentations and analysis and historical background today. Becca, would you help us with the questions and answers?
Yes, thank you, Peter. Thank you, William and Don as well. We do have a couple of questions. The first question is asking about other resources, other books that cover the history of Christian Zionism. So we might punt that one a little bit to our follow-up email, because there are a lot. Maybe William or Don, if you've got one you want to share right now for the group, that would be great. But otherwise, we'll include that in some follow-up resources, because there are a lot.
Well, I'll just, this is Don, I'll mention Mitri Raheb. He's got 3 of them that deal with decolonizing, and we need to listen to Palestinian Christians. Munther Isaac will be having one. He's the pastor of Christmas Lutheran, and he is Christ Under the Rubble will be his book. He preached that famous sermon. And then Stephen Sizer has several, and Robert O. Smith would be another one, authors you could look for. And I've got a couple that are average. Okay.
And I'll just add to that, Rahab and Munther are great introductions to Zionism. Also, I would lift up Black Power in Palestine by Michael Fischbach. Gives a great history of the Black involvement in the liberation movement, solidarity movement for Palestine. And another book I'm getting into by historian Martin Kramer, I mentioned, The War on Error, Israel, Islam, and the Middle East. He gives some written about 10 years ago, but gives some good information, particularly on the issue of Dr. King's involvement with Zionism.
Great, thank you both. We have a question around, is there a movement to deal collaboratively with the way to not pay taxes to our US government? I would say I don't know of any, and I would not encourage you to not pay your taxes to the US government. However, we do have lots of action alerts, and we'll share some of those links again in the emails, but to talk to your representatives, to talk to those folks who are running for office currently, ask them about their positions on Israel and Palestine, ask them about their positions on sending military aid overseas generally, because that's also something that plays into this and we're encouraged about. But I can answer that question there for you. As the Minister for Global Advocacy and Education here, I
I'm going to
will,
word quickly on
yeah.
that. You know, it's, I mean, what has been done in terms of funding Israel in this genocidal war violates U.S. law. The Arms Export Control Act of 1976 and the Leahy laws are passed by Congress, and they're violating their own laws. So Bernie Sanders has a movement, several congressmen have signed on, and it's going to be moving in the House. But I would also say there are people who are doing tax resistance. It shouldn't be done individually, but collectively, there are many who are feeling I cannot, as an act of stewardship, I have to withhold at least a portion. So there are some people who are doing that from a faith orientation. Not many, but a few.
Well, that's good to know, Don. Thank you. And then maybe there's a question around the source of President Biden's Zionism. I don't know how much he's spoken of that. If any of you know, like he's been a strong supporter of the state of Israel for a long time. I'm not sure if he is coming from a Christian Zionist perspective or not. Can either of you know any of that information? Can you speak to that?
I don't think he's coming from a faith perspective, but he is coming from a Zionist orientation that he talks about his father and the Holocaust and everything. I think it's more of, kind of the pressure of APAC and the various lobbies are one. Remember, Christian Zionism is a powerful lobby with Christians United for Israel, claim over 10,000 members, 10 million members, I'm sorry. But it's really the neoconservatives, the pro-Zionist neoconservatives that he's surrounded with are more the pressure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's more of a policy thing for him, and there have been reports of him, his thoughts of the government of Israel, particularly Netanyahu, that he disagrees with much of what Netanyahu is doing privately, although it's not making it out, into policies and action, which is unfortunate.
And then we had a question on the differences between an Israeli, a Jew, a secular Jew. I can help clarify some of that. But so Israelis are typically people who are from the state of Israel. So you can have Israeli Arabs who might be Palestinian origin. But that's typically the definition of Israeli, is someone from what we call the state of Israel, whereas Jew is the faith term. So you've got American folks who are Jewish. You've got folks who are Jewish in all different countries and all over the world. So I think those are some distinctions, and I think that's part of the problem with when we talk about Zionism, is equating the state of Israel with the whole of the Jewish public and the people who practice Judaism. There's there are efforts to call any criticism of the state of Israel anti-Semitic, which we as the United Church of Christ and as global ministries don't believe that that's accurate. There are ways to criticize the government of the state of Israel that is anti-Semitic, absolutely, but there are also ways to criticize the policies and practices of a government without demonizing the entire country and the entire population, in particular of people who hold the same faith. Don or William, do you want to add to any parts about
Yeah, just
making those
briefly,
distinctions?
I think you covered it, but I think we need to be very careful about distinguishing between Judaism as a living faith that we affirm and Zionism. It's fine to critique Zionism as a political ideology. And our friends at If Not Now, Jewish Voice for Peace, are among the leaders in showing how that is done. And we need to work closely with them and encourage them to come in our churches and to work with those synagogues.
Absolutely. And I see we're coming up on time, so I'm going to wrap us up quickly to say that there's a lot of folks who believe that Christian Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic in and of itself because it believes that the Jews should not be in our countries, in our spaces, in our communities, but they should all gather together in one place away from us. So I'll make that note there as well. But as we close, friends, thank you all so much for joining us today. As Peter mentioned, this week has been a focus on the Keep Hope Alive campaign, in which we are encouraging folks to help keep hope alive for our Palestinian partners in particular. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of sadness and depression. And a whole range of emotions. So we are trying this week to help keep hope alive for our Palestinian partners. And so we're asking folks to help us sponsor 500 olive trees, the planting of 500 olive trees in Palestine. More information on that is found on our campaign website, which will again be posted in the chat now and in the follow-up resources. One tree is $20, so you can help us get to 500 with a whole group of folks, just one. And those trees are planted by our partners, the Joint Advocacy Initiative of the YMCA and the YWCA in Palestine. And that program has been going on for over 20 years and will continue after this week. It's an ongoing project and partnership. So you can keep hope alive today, tomorrow, in a year, in 5 years. We definitely encourage that as well. So thank you all for attending today. And I will turn it back over to Ellie.
Definitely not enough time for this conversation, right? I know that back in the early stages of the pandemic, we had Zoom settings and we had Zoom rooms, and we'd all go off into our Zoom room, and we came back, and ultimately everyone said that it wasn't enough time. And that's how I feel about this conversation. There is just so much richness, so much for each of us to consider, both in our current individual, where it is that we find ourselves, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And what a gift it is to have people who are really the thought leaders, providing an opportunity to meditate in the difficult times, and yet to produce a message that is so clear, that we all want more. And beloveds, I wanted to recap what we heard today, but again, that would be a recap of another half hour, and nobody wants to hear from me. And so I just want to thank you. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today, and for our presenters. What a gift to have you in this world, caring for all of God's people, and God's creation, right? And I hope that this is just the beginning of many conversations, because I know I'm going to be sending out an email immediately going, okay, when's the next one? When can we continue this conversation? And so, beloveds, thank you for joining us for this webinar today. And if you're watching it in the future, if you have questions that were not answered and you're just dying to know the answer, and you can't find it using your own critical thinking skills to search beyond page 1 on your internet search engine, reach out to me. I'd be happy to help guide you in the right way. And if that's these folks here on your screen or others, I will be happy to do so. But we look forward to being again with you all again next Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I have goosebumps just for the title of this one. We are going to be hosting the DC offices for our Don't Be Scared, Be Prepared. With November 5th fast approaching, it can be difficult to keep all of the election anxiety at bay. And the past few years have demonstrated how the time between the presidential election and the inauguration can be uncertain, chaotic, and even scary. As some sow doubt about the strength of our electoral system for personal gain, foreign and corporate actors seek to influence the election for their own gain as well. And we read a lot of misinformation blaming immigrant communities for voting irregularities. We also see states trying to navigate voter registrations and so on and so forth. And so these are all of the ways to keep elections scary intentionally. But here at the United Church of Christ and with our DC offices, we have a plan in place to keep those scaries away. And please join us next Thursday for that deeper conversation. And Reverend William, I'd love to turn it over to you to provide a benediction to take us all out. Thank you so much, beloveds, for joining us today.
Thank you, Reverend Hutchinson. I guess I'll say as a way of introduction that if there's one note of thanks that we can give to Gustavo Gutierrez this week, it is that through liberation theology, as Dr. Wagner has been talking to us today about, Black people and Palestinian Christians have found a space to find solidarity, identity, and hope in the Christian faith. And so as we leave this sacred space, but never from your presence, dear God, let us go out, as Dr. Mitri Raheb suggests all the time, to be the hope. Let us be the hope. In your many names, we ask it all. Ashe and Amen.
Siblings in Christ, if you are moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.